Greetings and welcome to the pre-concert video for the Victoria Symphony. This concert is simply called Now, with a big exclamation point after it, Contemporary Canadian Voices. So we're going to feature the works of four composers on this program: Nicole Lizée, Farangis Nurulla, Jocelyn Morlock, and our own composer in residence for the Victoria Symphony, Marcus Goddard. Now, the great thing about a concert like this is not only is the music really, really exciting, and it promises to be a really, really fun program to watch and to listen to. There's a lot of visual elements. But the great thing for me as a pre-concert presenter is that I get to hear the composers talk about their own music in their own words. So I'm here in my basement. This is my Zoom corner where I hold all my Zoom meetings. So I'm able to contact all of the composers remotely, and you'll get to hear them talk about their music. So I hope you enjoyed this program and hope to see lots of you there. So I'd like to introduce you all to Farangis Nurulla. This is the first time that we've performed a piece of hers. And happily, it's also a Canadian premiere for this piece, Gusto, which she wrote. You'll have to tell us the origin of this piece, and welcome from Montreal. Here we go.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Well, I'm very happy also that Victoria Symphony decided to perform Gusto. And this piece I have written in 2012, and it's been premiered in Sweden by Kammarensemble. And this time it will be premiered in Canada. So while I was writing this piece, it was a year after my father passed away, and I dedicated this piece to my father, who was an incredible cook and who had loved to gather people around him, and I really cherish those beautiful moments with everyone. Gusto is also concentrated around breathing. So that breath, which accompanies us all our lives, and one day it disappears.
Right. Okay.
So the harmony of the piece is around. I did a structural analysis of the gong. And using different kind of mallets, which I played myself, and then recording the sound. And after doing analysis, I used it to compose the piece. So basically, the harmonic structure of the piece comes from a sound of gong, analyzed.
That's interesting, because as you know, I'm a brass player. Yeah. And when we did last season, we did a couple of Mozart horn concertos. So I spent part of one of these talks explaining to the audience how every sound has a group of pitches mixed together to make the sound. When you hear a note, like on the piano, I'm standing next to a piano here. That C that I just played on the piano has such a huge number of sounds in it that you don't really hear, because they're all mixed in with the sound. And the same thing on a brass instrument, you can play a whole series of notes together. So this is really fascinating that you've used all of the harmonics that you can pick out of the gong. It's sort of like when you look at the sky, and you not only see blue in the sky, but you could see other colors there if you look really deeply to how the colors all blend together. So that's fascinating how you've drawn that all into a piece.
This is beautiful parallel you did with the sky. Yes, it's, and also when we breathe, it's also, there are so many things happening with our breath and the sound and breath. It's basically in this piece, it's you can hear different rhythms of breathing. And
Oh, okay.
yeah, yes, I mean, at least I had that in mind. Uh, uh, and also I was working closely with the texture and of the sound, and with those shadows of the sound. Well, I won't go long into details.
Sure.
So, but the main thing I think I have to say, it's concentrated around breath and sound.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's great. The and then this is one of the only pieces on the program. This is a fairly small program. There'll be a lot of like a smaller group of the orchestra performing. But
Mm.
this is one of the few that has winds, and it actually uses the saxophone
Mhm,
as well,
mhm.
which is an instrument you don't see. Are you partial to wind instruments? Do you have a, or is it because it was about the
Unfortunately,
breath that
no.
you wanted to incorporate wind instruments?
But unfortunately, I don't play any of wind instruments. I am a pianist, just a pianist. So, I use saxophone. Yes, it was a special choice because since it has lots of possibility to produce different kind of breath and saxophone, and so I thought it would be really right, fantastic instruments also to use in Gusto. I'm very
Well, it's been great to speak to you about the piece, and we really look forward to being the first group in Canada to be able to play it. So thanks for talking to us.
Oh, thank you, and I'm looking forward also to hear the piece after several years since it's been performed. Um, thank you.
So here I am in my basement studio with my friends across the Salish Sea, our two colleagues in Vancouver, Jocelyn Morlock and Marcus Goddard. And Marcus will be familiar to our audiences because he has been our composer in residence for the last two seasons. And Jocelyn Morlock, again, no stranger to Victoria audiences. We've performed a number of her works. And if you'll remember last year when we dug up some footage from our archives, I interviewed Jocelyn about a work that we performed at the Goulden Hall a few seasons back. So it's great to see you both. And I'm glad that we can do this. I'm glad that we can get right out of the gate on our new season with live performances of your works. So, Jocelyn, I'm going to start with you and tell me a little bit about Disquiet. What's the origin of this piece?
Okay, so Disquiet was written, gosh, I forget how many years ago now, a little over 10. CBC created this Shostakovich project where they commissioned 10 short pieces from 10 different composers. And we all used the DSCH theme, which is D, E flat, C, B, which is kind of an ominous chromatic theme, and it's Shostakovich's initials. So that's where I started from. And the word disquiet to me sounds a little like saying DSCH, but it's also the mood of that was something I really wanted to capture because I tried to imagine what it could be like being Shostakovich and being this musical genius, writing in this terrifying time where if your music said too much to people, you might be locked up or taken away and never heard from again. And how does a person keep trying to communicate with people and saying what's important to them while under this kind of psychological duress? So it was almost miraculous to me that he could do that. And that's kind of that, but that mood of tension is what the piece is about.
Now, last year on our virtual season, we did the strings did the chamber symphony, the version of his quartet that uses that motif. And I did a whole little animated video of where that whole, how that whole that how that whole thing came to being. So this will be an excellent refresher for those people that heard that piece last year to hear how it's inspired somebody else to write along the sort of the same lines. And Marcus, this piece that you're doing with us, Livewire, it's I'm going to rub away tears here. It's our last commission from you as our composer in residence. Um, Tell us a little bit about how this piece came about and what the audience can expect.
Well, Livewire was originally going to be for full orchestra, and because of our times, we've changed it a little bit into a double string quartet. And the idea behind the piece comes from kind of me looking at pop music with my daughters and all the electronic stuff that comes with pop music, and also how, you know, pop music is actually very inventive also. They're always exploring new sounds in the electronic world. And so I wanted to do something of a cross between um, electronic exploration and this new music sound that a quartet can do so well. So it's really like a cross between um, a simple exploration of color and like a big pop anthem at times.
Neat.
Yeah. So the
I
string.
like that. I like that idea a lot because one of the things that I talk about a lot when I'm talking to the pre-concert audiences is that the lines between sort of the music of the people and the music of the composers were pretty blurry through most of music history. Like there wasn't this huge demarcation between popular music and so-called what we call serious music nowadays. And then it a sort of a gap opened up. Now we think of the stuff that the symphony orchestra does as very serious and everything else is over here. And it's really nice to see those things come back together. They've never been fully torn apart because even Beethoven wrote popular music,
Mhm.
and of course we're doing Mahler. The orchestra's rehearsing Mahler this week, and of course Mahler was always quoting folk music and trying to evoke that kind of nostalgia as well. So this is great to have this progression, like a real synthesis of the popular and I understand the instruments are there's going to be some amplification, there's going to be some distortion and
Yeah,
that kind of
definitely.
thing.
There's every instrument is mic'd, and sometimes you'll hear just the natural color of the instruments, and sometimes it will be pumped up and distorted so much it sounds like Eddie Van Halen on the guitar.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Excellent. Now, the neat thing about I'm glad I'm interviewing both of you at once because you're both working in the same area. You've both worked for the same orchestra as well. You've both composed for the Vancouver Symphony. Jocelyn was at one time the Vancouver Symphony's composer in residence. I'm going to throw a curveball question. Is there a major difference in the way you approach composition when you're an actual musician in the orchestra as opposed to somebody coming in from the outside? Because Jocelyn, you've never played in an orchestra, not that I know of. I mean, other than maybe the odd time. And of course, Marcus, you're the associate principal trumpet player of the Vancouver Symphony. So is there is there some different are there different approaches when you're looking at the orchestra from those two different perspectives?
Yeah, I don't know. You know, one perspective I have just being in the orchestra is that I know everybody, every player quite well personally, and every player has a personality to their playing as well. Like you say in the woodwinds, brass or strings. So I think it trickles over into my writing when I'm writing for the VSO that I'm thinking of specific players, not even just the instrument and the color, which can be really interesting because then you're writing to someone's almost character or the little things that make their playing stand out as really individual to them. So I think
Great.
that's kind of neat.
I would, even as a non-player, have to echo that absolutely. Like writing for VSO, you'd be writing, I'd be writing, if it was a trumpet, I'd be writing for Marcus, or I'd be writing for, or Christy Reside, or various people, and you know them, and so it's really interesting. I mean, and that can happen if you're writing for other orchestras too. You start getting to know some of the people, but it's different when it's a group that you have, spend time around. So it's pretty cool. So I'd have to echo Marcus despite being a non-player in orchestra. Yeah.
That's a really great that's a really great perspective how both of you look at that too. And as a musician too, um, this is one of the things that I love about doing new music, because you get there's an actual collaboration that can take place. Like when I play Schubert, I can't go back and say, "Hey, Franz, why did you do this or that or the other thing? Would it make more sense if, I took this note down an octave or whatever?" Can't do that, and we sort of have, there's sort of a gulf fixed, and a lot of imagination that has to take place, and then of course the music mutates over time as orchestras change. So it could be and there's a whole movement of music that's trying to go back and trying to imagine exactly what it was like playing under the conditions of the time. But we can never do that. But with modern composers, it keeps the art form actually moving forward. It keeps the art form actually growing and evolving. So it's really exciting to be able to talk to both of you today. And I've got other interviews to do, so I think maybe we'll leave it here, and this should be enough for me to use. So I'm here now with two great friends, Nikki Lizée and Vern Griffiths. Vern is no stranger to Victoria Symphony audiences as the man behind the wall of percussion on the famous kids show, the Wall-to-Wall Percussion. And we're going to talk about Perxploitation, the piece that Nikki's written specifically for Vern. Nikki, how does that work? How does this kind of collaboration happen?
It happened pretty organically. I'd been working with Vern quite a bit with Standing Wave, and it was always, the collaborations were always fantastic. And I knew I wanted to do more with Vern, and I think we were hanging out in Montreal. I can't remember the year, but it came up pretty quickly. I said, "How about, I think I said the two words, percussion concerto." And I think Vern said, "Yeah," and that was all we needed. And Vern sort of took it from there and made it happen with a VSO. Yeah, and it happened fairly quickly. Once once those two words were uttered, yeah, it was a fantastic turn of events. We ran with it, and it was fantastic.
So this work was premiered by the Vancouver Symphony
in 2019. We did
2019.
the full orchestra version, and then a year later we did the reduced version. So it's the suite from Perxploitation, which takes the orchestra from like being 70 players down to like 7, which for COVID purposes is actually a little helpful. So that's the version we're doing in Victoria. So it's string quintet, piano, and electric guitar, and movie. So should we talk about the movie?
Yeah, let's hear about the movie part, because you use a lot of visuals in your works, Nikki. It's an interesting little experience. Your works are a real experience that way.
Yeah, I mean, my film works, what's central to them is that the film, the score, and the Foley sounds or the soundtrack are created in tandem, simultaneously, absolutely, because I strongly feel that they have to coexist equally. So they're very, very informed by the other. They're very intertwined. It's not accompaniment. Nothing accompanies the other. They're the characters on screen, I view them as a character in the chamber ensemble, because they produce noise, they're notated, they're interacting with the humans that are on stage, the live players. And so there has to definitely, I work the piece until the point where there is definitely an interaction, a real interaction between all the characters on stage, those that are flesh characters and those that are they're on screen, because they together make an ensemble a sort of unique ensemble together.
And what sort of images did you use for, or what characters did you end up developing for Perxploitation? Where did they all, what were the inspirations? Where did they all come from?
Well, for this piece, obviously the core of it was going to be characters that either have roles in films that are, you know, evidently that if they play a drum or they carry a drum, there's an instrument in the scene. But
Okay.
I didn't want to stop there. It actually only begins there. I also wanted to discover instruments that would never be associated with percussion and create them, transform them into a percussion instrument. And so that, yeah, they could form a duo, a duet, and a dialogue with Vern, with the screen and on stage. So it started off with something like the Man with the Golden Arm, which Frank Sinatra plays Kit in there, and the Gene Krupa story, which has Kit in it. But then everything else came from other sources. For example, the scene where the priest falls down the stairs in The Exorcist. Now, I've seen that movie many times, and that sound is like no other sound. And for me, that was a percussive, that was a rhythmic. I transcribed it. The timbre of the stairs, the way, you know, the crash at the end. That for me was prime moment for a musical. That provided the bedwork for a musical work. Things like that. The teacup, the shaking poltergeist is another really a favorite of mine since I was a really young kid, probably before I should have ever watched it. I watched it probably 100 times. And that movie too has sounds and timbres that for me are music. They have music, and so for a long time it was on my list of something that could be its own instrument. So the teacup in when the person, the scientist, is shaking because she's just witnessed these horrors that are going on. And the teacup is both visually and sonically very emotive. And so I transcribed that and also had Vern join in the fun by playing a teacup so that could just extract this moment that has its functions in a movie for a narrative, take it out and use it exclusively for its potential in the concert hall, and for performers to play with this character who's now an instrumentalist, this scientist, because she's engaging with a teacup and it's transcribed and the ensemble is embellishing it, and Vern is also playing teacup, becomes a concert piece.
That's really cool. And of course, Vern, you're all about turning things that aren't percussion instruments into percussion instruments, right? So this is just sort of like a natural activity for you, isn't it?
For sure, yeah. I mean, basically, to a certain extent, she's, you know, the title says it all, that she's exploiting things that are percussion sounds, or not percussion sounds, but using them that way, right? So there's a scene from Aliens where the android Bishop does that trick with the knife where you go between the fingers of the knife.
Yes.
But because he's an android, he's able to do it crazy fast.
Right.
But so Nikki transcribed the rhythm of the knife and then puts that rhythm into my part on the vibraphone and tom-toms.
I was just going to say, I hope she didn't actually ask you to stick a knife between your
thankfully, no. Wow, that's you see her eyes light up.
There's a little glimmer from Nikki there. That's
well, we did the next. I wasn't going to. I think I started that email, but didn't send that email to ask him to do that. But we did the next best thing. We got Vern to act. So if you look at the scene, he actually takes the place of Bill Paxton, who's in the scene, who's the one, the human that's getting the knife between his fingers. And we superimposed Vern in that role. So Vern did some shooting and some green. I don't know if we had to use green screen. We didn't use, we reenacted. Yeah, it was reenacted. Yeah. And so I superimposed it into the scene so that it becomes, eventually we see that it's Vern going through this very thing without actually
fantastic.
having to hurt him. Yeah.
That is so cool.
So, yeah, there's several times in the movie where I actually appear in the movie. So I'm, you know, both playing on stage and also playing like during the cadenza, I'm playing on stage, but I'm playing in the movie at the same time.
Yeah,
which is fun, along with Gene Krupa. So it's great to do drum duels with Gene Krupa and Frank Sinatra.
Yeah,
so,
there you go. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, this is fantastic. I don't want to spoil any more of the piece for the listeners, so we'll leave it here. But thanks so much for taking time out of an extremely busy schedule to talk to me. I know, Nikki, you've got to run away to another meeting, and I know, Vern, you've got to go run away and play Back to the Future at some
Back to
point
the
today with
Future.
the film
Yeah.
score to Back to the Future,
Excellent.
talking about films. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Excellent.
crazy, but it's so great to be back, and it's great to meet you virtually for the first time, Nikki. So I really look forward to hearing this piece and look forward to playing more of your works in the future. So thanks very much.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
This was a pleasure, and it's great to see you both. And thank you for performing the work. And thank you, Vern, one of my favorite percussionists. I mean, I love it. It's been so long since I've seen you, so it's so wonderful to see you. I wish I could be there. I hope everyone enjoys it. And thank you all.
Yeah, looking
Cheers.
forward to being there for sure. Thanks, Nikki. Thanks, Bob.